from the critical exercise you just presented, Maxwell, reminding us of extractive processes at the core of our spatial regimes and facilitated by digital infrastructure. We've got also the contribution from provides, which is very articulate, but at the same time, I have the impression it's also very polemical, and in its content and in its ambition. Even though they do operate at very different levels, these three contributions, I'm sure there's many, and we've seen there's many cross topics and points of interaction between them. So, how do you see these interactions? I want to now open the discussion to you. I'm sure you have yourselves questions to your fellow contributors, and also André and Pietro, please also join if you have some questions and you want to address somebody. So maybe I start just to launch. So I have a question for provides, actually, because for me your contribution was really challenging, and challenging because not just because it seems very elaborated and also very very dense with information. That's not the problem. The problem for me, or the challenge, is in a kind of an underlying note, as I see. That's why I meant that it's polemical, because there's a certain kind of assumption or certain message that we can optimize certain processes in our common urban living with the aid of technology. So it is, to some extent, some sort of exercise of techno-optimism. And how do you try to position and to place the criticisms that, for example, Maxwell has pointed out, that are central to how we've built these digital infrastructures and so on? How do you place those points of view in your vision for your work?
Yeah, this is actually a very challenging question. I mean, I don't believe that a technology is going to solve our problem. I believe that a technology, if not used properly, is going to accelerate our problem. So in the paper and also in the talk, I think I've also stressed a lot on it's actually not a technological problem, it's a social economic problem. But if we have a strategy, how can we use technology to scale up the strategy? Like, for instance, if we're only able to reach out to 10 people in order to organize a housing, can we now reach out to more people who have the sort of same need? And how we can sort of play the system to our advantage? Because I think a lot of the times, Maxwell also mentioned like the bad side of the sharing economy that platform urbanism is currently playing to cities. And right now, most governments, they are more reactive than active towards such kind of phenomenon. And for personally, my opinion is that government can only be a regulator because they're always two steps behind the advancement of technology. But what if government takes on an active role in facilitating a platform for communication? Then he doesn't have to be the regulator because he can actually facilitate a communication, like act as the more central agency. But of course, then how would citizens be able to monitor how the government is developing these strategies? And that would need a platform communication in itself to crowdsource as much opinion as possible. But first and foremost, it's not a technical problem, it's a social economical problem of setting the framework. Yeah, so I think all of our projects are all thinking about this problem. I think I may also direct the same question to Maxwell, who I see is also an alumni from Bartlett. I'm stalking all of your Instagram platform while we're presenting.
Thanks, Provides. Yes, very happy to have gone through the Bartlett system as well. I think for me, there's also this question of ecosystems. Let's say the ecosystems of the digital, of the city, are quite unique. Defined in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as other parts of the global south. But I think what was clear in, say, the presentation by Hika and Emmanuel is what particular geographies offer in this regard. And I think there is a need to address this the global similarities, but also the local differences within digital ecosystems. So, for example, within your work, which takes this sort of Eastern perspective of digital space and digital life, very much differs in how mature people interact with platforms. For in China, for example, the network offered there is so much more integrated than elsewhere.
Sorry, provide. Go on.
I would say I would be interested in sharing a more Chinese perspective, but I think other people should also have a go.
Yes, maybe we can just point a question to Emmanuel and Hilke, because there was an aspect that I was very much looking forward in your presentation, and I know it was very dense, you went through a lot, but I slightly missed a little bit more on that. It's about the use of dramaturgy, the use of performance techniques, inspirations, in the way you address how you display and how you use these kind of tests in real world. And how you integrate them in your tool that you were showing. Just because I think there's also very much through there's a place for integrating a lot of critical attitudes and perspectives. This is clear from pedagogies that deal with theater and so on. So how have you do that, or have you considered integrating those things? Because I know Emmanuel's work on other levels. So perhaps you can say a couple of words on that.
May I just jump in there, Dario? Sorry,
I
will hand over to Emmanuel immediately to answer this question, but I just wanted to maybe comment on your entry statement about the problem of scaling, because I think that this is something, or is an issue, which kind of addresses all of our inputs today, Maxwell's as well as ours, and as well as provides, because as one can see, there has to be a local scale, and there are many circumstances and dynamics that can't be addressed by a universal approach. And this platform urbanism, for example, it is driven by a scaling up of processes, which brings problems because they don't take into account the local infrastructure, the ecosystems, and so on. I just wanted to mention that because I think that this is quite a productive approach to discuss the problems. This mentioning of scaling, how to scale up something, and what comes when you scale up things. That's just a comment from my side, and then I will hand over to you, Emmanuel, to answer the dramaturgical questions.
Okay, thank you. So I think the dramaturgical and the theatrical aspect can be seen in this project on many levels. Of course, also the setup of the ecological thing, and also going into following the Haraway aspect is a quite theatrical or even dramaturgical aspect, starting off what do we want to tell first, starting with that, then also not to just follow up what is possible and going from that. So this is on one point. And the other point is, of course, that we will, of course, not only think through and conceptualize and criticize the things that we see and that could be possible, but we will actually also do a lot of testing, what has a lot to do with theatrical aspects. You need to have people, you will have them in, you will see how they work. We will really see how do these concepts that we put into technology, in the tools, will they work, and what kind of effect does it have for them to get it? Is these things helpful or not? Is this maybe we're completely wrong, and these technologies are not a solution for everything? But this is up to stake also to see of that. Maybe we go back to plastilene and drawing, and maybe sitting together and talking is, especially when we're on a very local basis, is much better done with old technologicals than with digital technological means. That could be. But as I think what I know from theaters that I do in other ways is, of course, that we are interested in using new technologies because they were invented by something that is called the mind, and imagining what is possible, and it should be tested also what is possible to do with that in a way, then also to see what can be done then in another level. But still, I totally agree. The most important thing, of course, is to come and to get in contact with the persons and then find out in a kind of setting of experience. And this again is very dramaturgical and theatrical, to make a kind of settings and rules in order to make the people do an experience, in order then to rethink and to reformulate what to do. Is that an answer?
If I might add, Dario,
Yeah, sure.
I think we shouldn't also disregard the fact that platforms themselves are built on this sort of gamification of life, right? And that this idea of play is quite essential in how they have really grown, but also in the fight against platform dominance. I think often of David Graeber's statements of that play is the ultimate expression of freedom for its own sake. And so in that regard, I feel that there is a room to utilize these sort of techniques of play, whether offline or online, in looking for more equal urban governance and urban design.
Sure. Yeah, that's a really relevant point, actually. And how somehow, in a way, beyond gamification, we ought to then tackle games as serious things and take the game seriously. That's why, in a way, I think I saw there a thread with dramaturgy and endless elaborations on theater of the oppressed and many other kind of pedagogical experiments and theories about emancipation that actually go through performance, through role-playing, through reliving an experience and so on. And I think this is, in a way, that staging that to some extent digital technologies could allow in some arrangements is definitely to be seized as an opportunity for kind of, escaping kind of an already preset direction that we are going in. Anyway.
Well, just to add one thing, I think this is maybe a thing that theater can go beyond, or thus goes beyond in different parts. That it is not about only role playing, what is kind of a thing that we started with some decades ago, and still, of course, is there. But and this learned theater, of course, also from digitality, and it goes back to it. It is about building experiences in order to test possible futures, and something that is very possible possibilities, and to see it. So theater can be seen also as a test lab, as well as the test labs can be seen, of course, as a theater. But I think there are other people who are raising hands.
Yes, I did try to raise my hand, and I think it's the hands, the Zoom hands are on the other screens.
Oh, sorry. Yes,
I'm kind of outside of the scope. No, so it isn't the technology. We still have to get used to it. There's it's kind of a oral fatical interactions are evolving, kind of concentrate since the past year, and it's I think we're all evolving in this new noospheric world. It just I just wanted to, it's perhaps less of a question than a reaction to specifically to the presentation of Maxwell. There was but it also concerns the others. Suddenly what it stirred to me were recollections of the idea that that was not explicitly mentioned by anybody, but this but somehow subjacent in the presentations, and specifically in the presentation of Maxwell, this aspect of mythology, of the this kind of a show capitalism, a reincarnation of mythologies in the new forms of digital exploitation and the front end that they present. And I liked very much Maxwell, an expression you sort of brought to a point in intuition that we probably all have, that automation is just another word for human exploitation. And I liked very much your example, which really, for me, illustrated this mythology of this kitchen that actually is only one kitchen that provides, that is the back end to several restaurants. When you make totally different stuff, and you I don't know, we have a pizzeria with a hamburger in an Indian restaurant, all actually taking place in being physically located in the same place. And the associations that came to my mind was also with some literature in the around those mythologies, which is quite old, but I think it could be reincarnated. I was thinking about the Société du Spectacle of the Guy Debord and the Simulacre et Simulation of Baudrillard. Just stuff that came to my mind. But I thought really what you presented really well presented this new mythology that is emerging in this digital world, in the digital city. Perhaps I don't know if you can react on that, or if you have associated this with
Yeah,
other in this around this mythology theme. And if,
I think also Hick and Emmanuel talked a little on this idea of these imaginaries, right? In shaping our view of digital, also harking back to say writers like Philip K. Dick, which I think is important in the fight, as in what are the new imaginaries and how are these communicated beyond the academy, for example, in the general public, as a way of changing people's perception of platforms in particular. How do we go beyond this Uberized city, or a city built by Amazon, as they say? I think I should credit Louis Hyman, the writer, because he speaks a lot to this idea that before there was industrialization, there was industrialized space. The grouping of people into factories became a big part of the Industrial Revolution. And in this so-called fourth Industrial Revolution, the way in which people occupy space should also be considered quite thoroughly. But I see Pietro has his hand raised.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I can you hear me fine?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So I have a question, sort of an observation and the question for both Hilke and Emmanuel, and provides. I had the impression that both your presentations somehow, on the one hand, through the lens of simulation, this idea of simulation and testing in planning, and on the other hand, in the idea of segmentation, there was this idea that one of the roles of planning is to basically, or one of the underlying narratives is avoiding tensions and frictions, avoiding the unexpected and mystery. And I'm aware that this has become an agenda for planning, but I'm kind of questioning whether we should put forward this agenda, whether we should accept this agenda, and whether cities in the past haven't been about the opposite of this. I have in mind like a talk by Rancojas in which he mentions smart cities, and he shows a picture from, I don't know, the 20s, like a black and white picture of a city with fog at night, and it's very mysterious. And he says, cities used to be about this. They used to be about the possibility of unexpected encounters, the possibility of unexpected frictions, but now there seems to be an underlying narrative whereby we have to avoid that, and simulation and testing and segmentation are in function of this scope. I wanted to launch this provocation and see what you think about this.
Actually, I have a suggestion. Why don't we, in order to also make the space for the conversation after the other presentations, why don't you keep this question and then we relaunch it in the conversation after Pietro's and Andres' presentation? Does that sound like a good idea? Okay, great.